everyone wants the peak of the mountain, but actually what you should be desiring is what we should be teaching people to desire, especially young people, is actually like the character that you build in the process of reaching for something. Who you become is, in some ways, more valuable than the big outcome that everybody sees and claps and standing ovations. Who you become is what you pass on to your children. It's what you pass on to the people around you. It's your legacy in some ways. It's your influence on the world. It's who you become in the process of being.
I'm so excited to share with you this conversation with the poet Luka Lesson. I wanted to speak to Luca because more than anybody, he understands the power of words to tell stories and to shape reality. He also has pursued possibly one of the most difficult creative paths in a career for himself solely as a poet, which is, I mean, how many poets do you know who are making a living from poetry alone? There's so many gems in this conversation, from how the words we use and the stories we tell ourselves cast spells and create our reality, Luca's journey to becoming the self-sustained artist that he is, and the process of leaving a stable, lifelong job to pursue poetry. It's a powerful conversation, not only about poetry and language, but also the modern world and its distractions, which are pulling us away from the deep work, the true work of the process of becoming, which is far more vital and integral than the final outcome. I know you will love this conversation with Luca, and if you do find value, please, I ask one thing: share with a friend. I must apologize, I didn't realize, if you're watching this on YouTube, just quite how unbuttoned my shirt is. Sorry for the cleavage. I was channeling Russell Brand, but I know you'll love this conversation, and I'll catch you on the other side.
That's the beautiful struggle, that's the beauty in the struggle. I think it's really important. I wouldn't want my son to be sheltered to the point where he doesn't have any struggle, doesn't have anything to push up against. He doesn't have a ceiling, in a sense, that he needs to try and break through. I think that it's important to teach that the struggle is the point, and a lot of that struggle, I think sometimes the mistake that a lot of people make is thinking that that struggle is only physical, financial, whereas the majority of the work is like internal work. Like, what are these things that I'm butting up against? What are these patterns that I'm tend to be showing, or what are the blind spots that I might have that I could work on? And that then gets reflected in the physical world, and then you do work in the physical world, and it gets reflected on the inner world, and it's like an interplay. And most people, all people, unless they're born complete, yeah, Buddhas, exactly, then there is some kind of there's work to be done. But you're right, people get this false sense of security when they get given a house or given every opportunity they want, that somehow also there's nothing for them to work on internally because there was nothing for them to work on externally.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm a full-time poet, brother. I'm a full-time poet, like I chose a path, or a path chose me, that most people would just be like, impossible. That's not, there's no such thing as a full-time poet. You need a job, you need a this, you need a that. What will you do? But that's the path that's been set up before me, and there's a beautiful struggle in that. And there's been so many so many ups and downs, and the ups are crazy and the downs are crazy. Like there is no, like you, there's no safety net beneath me. And I know that that's a path of entrepreneurs. I know that's a path of like so many people in the world, people that have migrated to new countries, refugees, like all sorts of people for all sorts of reasons have this experience of having no safety net. And for me, my safety net is the art. It is the poetry. It is my creativity. And I feel most lost, or most in a down slump, when I'm down and not creating, when I'm not making something new, when I'm not expressing what's going on for me, when there's no like flow in terms of the input of experience and the output of alchemy, the poetry comes out as a way of converting my experience into beauty. And that's the only safety net really that there is, like coming back to the art, or for yourself coming back to the thing that probably is lighting you up in the moment, like what makes you go,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
fuck yeah, I want to do that thing.
That excitement.
Yeah.
How did you? I feel like you're miles away. That's weird. How did you?
Maybe I shouldn't move because you got the camera
No,
set.
you're. Yeah, I can. That can be cropped. It's
Yeah.
easy. How did? So the arts is probably the least safety netted,
Hmm.
whatever
Yeah.
pursuit you can do. I
Yeah.
love that quote. What's that great? There's a great saying I love about poets. It's like, as a young man, it's romantic, and as an old man, you're a bum. Like the culture thinks it's all right. You're drinking. Like, oh, isn't it beautiful? And all the girls love it when you say it.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, you hit your
Yeah.
fifties, and you're like, oh, he's this
Oh, he's
person
just
without
a
a
poet. He
job.
never did anything else. Yeah.
And particularly
That's
in
funny.
this country, there's a real
Yeah.
lack of respect for the arts
Yes.
and the beauty, and just beauty in general. You see it represented in the architecture and the
Hmm.
utilitarian approach to living,
Hmm.
as opposed to like, how can we beautify this? It's just like, what's your problem, mate? It's got a roof and four walls
Yeah.
and a toilet out the back. Shut up.
Yeah.
So poetry's how did as a young man growing up in Queensland, Brisbane, is it
Yeah.
Brisbane?
Mm-hmm.
How did hello buddy? Only you're
Hello.
welcome on set, right? Yet. Keep going. How did you was that a pull that you experienced from a young age? You were drawn toward the written word.
I hated poetry in high school.
Yeah.
I was not interested at all in the way it was being taught or which poets were being taught.
Who were you being? Who were
At
the
a very, very young age, I think I was like 12 or 13, I went into a shop with my parents, I believe, my mother and my brother, and I don't think my dad was there, but I went into this shop and there was all sorts of stuff in there. I think it was like maybe one of the first kind of maybe spiritual stores in Brisbane, maybe. Not sure. And I found a small book, like a little book like this, and it was like these little short poems, like really short, 5, 10 lines, and they were numbered. There were no names on any of the poems, and I was like, man, what is this? And I read one, I was like, whoa, that's deep. And I read another one, I was like, damn, that's cool. Oh, that's a good idea. Remember, there was one about ostensibly, it was about negative space. Like the vase is only a vase because of the hole, the space in the vase. The window only works because of what's not there. The wheel only works. The spokes only work because there's air between them.
that's some deep shit
Yeah, I was like
for
12. I was
for
like,
a
damn,
young
that's
kid.
deep.
Yeah.
It was the Tao Te Ching. It was
Yeah.
a
Okay.
ancient text by Lao Tzu. And so I was like, man, and that I guess never thought of it that way, but that was my first book of poems that I ever read. I took that book home, and I read it, and I really meditated on it. I really felt it, but I didn't think I'm going to be a poet. And then I went to high school and I started listening to hip hop, but I didn't really think I'm going to be a rapper. My teacher was teaching poetry in high school, and she didn't really tell me that the music that I was listening in my headphones that was full of alliteration and assonance and rhyme and meter and rhythm and storytelling, it was doing what she was trying to teach me. All those poems that she was trying to teach had rhyme and assonance and alliteration and meter and rhythm and all these different things in them. But there was no bridge between what I was enjoying and what she was trying to teach me. And so I'm listening to like Tupac in my headphones, and she's teaching, I don't know, Wilfred Owen, and there's like no bridge between the two worlds. And so I couldn't stand poetry in high school. I couldn't connect with it at all. And then in year 10, I went on a holiday with my family. It was the first family holiday that we'd taken overseas, my first time overseas. And while I was away, my best friend was hit by a car riding his bike. And I returned to Australia and I returned to school with these gifts from my friends. And one of my friends pulled me aside and said, hey, look, while you were away, this thing happened. And I went straight to the cemetery and saw a block of wood with my best friend's name carved on it over a mound of dirt. and and no one really taught me how to mourn that. Like no one really taught me how to consider that, reflect on that, express that. And I started staying up at night and writing a diary to my friend that passed away. So instead of Dear Diary, it was Dear Omar. His name was Omar. And so I wrote a diary to him. And for months, I would write every little nuanced memory that I had of him, of his skin, of his eyes, of his laugh, of his jokes, of conversations that we'd had, anything that I remembered, I just wrote down, and I wrote a message to him and how much I missed him. And no one knew about that book, and no one taught me how to do that, and no one read it, and now I don't even know where it is. But what I learned from that was that writing gives me a distance between the weight on my shoulders and the blank page. It helps me, those 30 or 40 centimeters between me and the pain that I'm suffering and the blank page is just enough distance for me to like see light in between those things going on in my life, and to let the light in. And it became this thing that I would turn to anytime I had a tough time in my life. For an Olympic runner, when they are having a great day, they go for a run. When they're having a terrible day, they go for a run. When they need to make a big decision, they're like, I'm going to go for a run, think about this. When it's raining, they're like, I'm doing it anyway, I'm going for a run. When it's sunny, it's like, oh, beautiful day for a run. Like, that's their place. For me, it's the page, it's the writing, and even just freestyling, just speaking poetry to myself, as a practice as well, is something that I do a lot. And it's where I feel most in tune, most aligned. It's actually kind of rather than it's where I feel most in tune, it's actually how I tune myself, how I get into tune, how I get into flow, how I get in realigned. And so from that moment, from those days when I was a teenager to in my late 20s when I also had a really traumatic experience, to today, writing has been that thing that came to me. And initially, in terms of writing and putting things out into the world, it was hip hop first and foremost. That was the first things that I wrote to share. Bad rap songs with a friend of mine in university who was the head of the hip hop society at UQ in Brisbane.
That'd be a great name for a band, actually, for a hip hop group. Bad
Well,
rap songs.
bad rap songs, yeah. Well, that was
Like,
us. And yeah, I wrote some bad songs, as you do, and that was beautiful. And then I found this thing online called slam poetry. There was a TV show in the States called Def Jam Poetry, with
yeah, I remember.
DEF, like
Yeah,
the record label. Um, and Most Def, Yasin Bey, he was the host of that at that time. And I saw poets on there. I was just like, that's the shit. That's what I want to do. There's not even a DJ, not even a microphone for some of them, like just you walk in on stage. People can judge whatever they want about the way you're dressed or the way you look. And then you speak a poem for like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and you've changed everybody's perspective. You've made the atmosphere of the room shift. You've got a standing ovation, maybe. You've shared something that has connected with people, that have made them feel seen, that feel not alone, feel like they know you deeply, more than family sometimes, because we write things. Sometimes I sit down to write and I share things on the page that I've never shared with anybody. And then I share it in public. It's this weird thing as a performance poet, or as a slam poet, spoken word poet, or even an actor that writes their own work. It's this weird conversion that we have to make between being introverted in the moments of writing, where we are like deeply connected with our truth and ourselves, and no one else is there, and shut the world out, and you're like sharing your deepest truths with the page. And then somehow you got to go from being the most introverted you've ever been to then being like the most extroverted, and sharing that thing that you wrote in your darkest hours, perhaps, or your quiet alone time. Then you get on stage and there's like 100 people, 200 people, maybe more, like going, all right, what are you going to tell us now? And it's like all of a sudden you're an extrovert, and you're like sharing this thing in the most powerful way that you can to help impact people. And so yeah, that's basically the journey. It's a long one, but slam poetry came to me. I entered poetry slams. I ended up winning the national slam in Australia, and since then, 2012, at the end of 2011, I won, and the end of 2012, started 2012, I quit my day job, and I've been a full-time poet since then.
I want to go into how that's possible for people because I think it's important to know that people can follow that intuitive dream that they have to
Mm,
know it's real
mm,
and that it's possible,
yeah,
despite what the culture might tell you or parents or
yeah,
all the things or even ourselves because it's
mm,
not a common thing to see someone who says I'm a poet and I'm making my money off it.
yeah,
Uh, I do just want to go back because it's interesting. I think of because I was really into poetry when I was younger as well. I found a lot
mm,
of when you feel alone and isolated and like no one understands you, as you only can when you're really young.
mm,
No, no one gets me. I'm so deep.
yeah,
No, but like general, like actual genuine pain and reading, finding poetry and finding just connecting to someone else and gone through that.
mm,
And not only gone through it, but spun it into light and into beauty
mm,
is that connection that you feel with someone who could have been dead for 500 years.
yeah,
That transcendent line of the
amazing.
beauty that runs through humanity and through
Hmm.
life. And then I think of you said about like slam poetry, like Paulo Neruda, like in Chile, like talking to stadiums full of people was
Yeah,
what used to happen with this before we had social media.
yeah,
And we were discussing that before we got on, which we can go to at some point.
yeah, sure.
But that vulnerability and the power of the word to change people's
Mm,
emotional states and to connect with them
mm,
is unbelievable. And it's interesting how poetry is, I don't know, you know better than I, but I still feel it now it has this connotation to it of being a certain way or being drab or being
mm,
when it's actually just a form of communicating the ineffable experience of being a human being
100%.
to another and comforting them or whatever that is that they need in that moment.
Mm. Yeah, Dominique Christina is a great poet from the United States, from Denver. She's won the Women of the World Slam multiple times.
Mm.
She has this great interview where she says, some people write to wake the dead. Some people write to create a future. Some people write to celebrate the present. Some people write, everybody writes for different causes, different reasons. Some to feel at home, some to rage against the machine, some to accept what is. And the beauty of poetry, I think, is that it is able to capture all of that. We're able to really distill deep or complex thoughts into moments that resonate and can resonate, like you said, across hundreds of years. And it has gotten a bit of a drab name. And sometimes I've been reluctant to call myself a poet, to use that word, because of being afraid of what people might think when they hear that word, what pops up in their minds when they hear that word poet. And they maybe remember their high school years where it was all dead white men that didn't really relate to their lives in that moment. And like I was saying, I was listening to Tupac and I had a poster on my wall of Tupac from his book of poems that he has called The Rose That Grew from Concrete. And there's a poem in there called In the Event of My Demise. So I had this poster that said, it was a photo of him that said, in the event of my demise, when I should live no more, I hope I die for a principle or a belief that I live for. I didn't think I'm going to be a poet. I just thought that resonates, like I feel that and I feel him and his character and what he stood for and what he did in his life and how flawed he was and that he could write this gentle line that was also powerful. And I think that I've taken on the name of poet because I want to redefine what people think of when they hear that word. And my work is different to what most people learn in high school. And now I am that bridge usually. I do a lot of work in schools and I've filled that place that I didn't have when I was in high school, where I can enter into a English classroom, enter into a education center, a school, and be the bridge between what the teacher's trying to teach and what actually resonates with young people. Like, what is the poetry that's living in them? Because in all of us, there is a poet somewhere in our lineage. Poetry and storytelling is one of the most ancient art forms. So somewhere in your history, in your family history, no matter which country you're from, there's a poet, there's a storyteller. And I just walk into the room expecting everyone to be a poet instead of judging or preempting
It
or,
needs to look a certain way.
yeah, you need to look a certain
Yeah.
way or be a certain way. And yes, the girls in the class that are highly articulate and the teacher expects them to write poems are usually great poets in terms of writing on the page, but they're usually actually not that great at performing because they can also be nervous, and the introvert isn't always an extrovert. But there are like extroverted boys at the back of the class that are actually great poets, which was me, that are kind of usually diverting attention away from their emotions by being loud and funny and teasing other kids. And actually, there's deep stuff in them, and they can be great performers because they are overtly, boisterous. So usually spoken word or slam poetry or performance poetry in a classroom is actually a great leveler because it makes the great writers kind of step up to perform, and makes the extroverts kind of sit down and get insular and actually write what's going on emotionally for them. And a combination of those things is what makes a good performer, a good poet. Um, but yeah, the reputation that the word poet has can often kill it before it even happens, and in terms of people not wanting to listen because they have this idea in the back of their minds of what a poet is. Um, And slam poetry is not necessarily the be all and end all answer to what poetry today can be. I think a poetry slam, if anyone's ever been to a poetry slam, it's only as good as its poets. You can't just be like, oh, I'm going to poetry slam. It's going to be great because of the structure and the competition and the nature of it. No, it's like it has that community invested in its poets. Are the poets good? Are they going to move the people? Or is it just going to be kind of repetitions of tropes and stereotypes and not such great understanding of language, or even more important than that, I think the most important thing for a poetry slam or a poetry event is that the poets are speaking things that are really like actually kind of scary for them. Like they're opening up about things that give them butterflies, like they're being brave. I think that that moves the audience, even if the writing's not that great or the performance is not that great. The bravery, the shaking hands, the anger, the ability to face things and be a little bit more brave than the audience when you sat down with your pen and your pad and you got butterflies in your stomach, and instead of turning away from that thing you were writing about and saying, oh, I can't write about that, that's the scary thing, you leant in and you wrote about that, and then you shared that
Yeah,
publicly.
yeah.
And that makes people
That's the
go,
stuff that's going to resonate.
yeah, that makes people go, damn, I'm way too scared to talk about that, but I went through something similar.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
There's two major threads coming through when you're talking. Like initially when you said about the writing and having that space to get between that piece or the light between your emotional state, particularly during a dark time, having and unfurling those thoughts into the page. Like it makes me think of I suffered from insomnia for such a long time, and it wasn't until I started going to bed and writing down all the insanity in my mind and letting that almost use that free flow of writing that I ever since I did that and I got over it, I've slept like a baby.
Wow.
Because we don't realize that we're out of control.
Yeah.
Like we're never taught in school, taught all this other stuff, which is generally
Totally.
useless, but we're not taught that we're insane, that our minds are out of control vehicles. We need to master our minds to have a coherent and successful life. And that there are really basic tools you can do to do that, which is at least to begin with, to start to get all the stuff out, and then also see what comes over you when you create that as a practice. Like you will start to feel, everyone will start to feel things flowing through them.
Yeah.
And it's a really vital and integral process to
Amazing.
have some sort of diary process.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, with poetry, the other thing that came to me, it's really interesting how we have this words create frameworks around them naturally. And people might not think, so if people, as you said, might not think they're a poet or they're a storyteller or they're engaged in poetry. But if we're taking it to the core of their words or associating meaning to the words, and they're all building blocks which are creating our life. So whatever you're consuming, what you're listening to, what you're looking at in social media,
Yeah.
YouTube, TV, whatever that is.
Mm.
That's a form of like story and poetry that you're immersing your life in.
Yeah.
So it's like, what do you want to choose? Like you're either going to be doing that unconsciously
Mm.
and manifesting your life from these stories that are coming from whatever sources,
Yeah.
or are you going to be, as I think, which is
Intentional.
intentional and like allowing your own story and genius, or at least being intentional about what you're consuming to start
Yeah.
carving that life for yourself.
Yeah, bro.
And I feel like that's where poetry now, if you're taking it, because you're looking at classical poetry, there's all these rule, like, you know, there's been people who've broken those rules and freed up.
Mm.
Like hip hop's been a really big, and we'll discuss them before we got on the chat, like Bukowski and these other poets who really broke the paradigm for their era, for what is considered poetry.
Mm.
And I feel like now we can just almost extend that to language. Like what stories and languages, as I just said, like a rattling around in your head.
Yeah.
And then what's the, having someone come, like, I think having someone like, I couldn't imagine that if I had you come into my school
Yeah.
and break that and be like, shit, I'm actually, because it wasn't until later, I got much later in life, like mid-20s, where I realized, oh, I'm actually into art. I'm into reading. I'm into all this stuff, because I just inherently thought I didn't like it because what I was taught.
Yeah.
And then there's no other avenues
Yeah.
that I was presented.
Yeah, brother. I hear you. I think that there's a lot of burgeoning poets. There's a lot of artists in schools that are being lost or not discovering that about them until much later in life. I think that art is obviously an absolutely integral part of life, even though I know through the pandemic we were all taught that it's um, not unimportant, you know, it's not integral to society.
No. But
Um,
fast food restaurants and bottle shops, definitely,
yeah,
they're
it's not a
necessary
exactly.
for
That's right. Essential services,
essential
remember? Essential
services. But
service. Even though during the pandemic, we all lent on that perfect album that we love. We all lent on that book that we needed to read. We all lent on movies and films, and we all lent on art to survive it. And I think that's the same every day. And when you're talking about the power of the words and how we are already consuming so many words around us, and sometimes that's intentional, sometimes it's not, that's totally true. You know, that's exactly why I think I do what I do, because, and I do this a lot as a practice to myself as well, especially at the moment, where you can write yourself, let's say, and this is a project that I'm working on at the moment that I know is kind of the reason why we've connected, because a mutual friend of ours, Tal, and I are creating a project called Talisman, which is all about facilitating a process where people can write themselves a poem that is a form of a mantra or a prayer or an intention or an affirmation that I lead the process of. And we get to the point of creating something that is actually a manifestation tool, we could say. And I wrote a poem called May Your Pen Grace the Page in 2007. And I wrote it when I was going through a really deep depression. I was having suicidal ideation at that time. I was broke and broken. And I wrote this poem as a letter to myself to believe that I could be a full-time poet, because I knew that it was what I needed. I knew that it was what I wanted. It was something that was resonating so deeply, but I didn't know a poet. I didn't know a full-time poet or a poet. I didn't know anybody that was doing what I really wanted to do. And I lived in Brisbane at that time, and there was only one poetry gig there once a month.
was it Rodney Root?
And
If you're not Australian, you won't
no,
get
but
that. But look it up.
no,
It's funny. Maybe
yeah,
don't
yeah,
look it
yeah.
up.
He was a poet. He was a great poet. Yeah, so I was just like, how am I going to do this? So I wrote this poem, and it's called "May Your Pen Grace the Page." It's up online if anyone wants to find it. It's got a couple videos, and actually one of the videos is I'll get to in a minute. So I wrote this poem, and I decided that that's what I wanted to do, and that's what I wanted to be. And it was a poem. The lines of the poem, some of it is, may your pen grace the page at the same pace as your brain. May your grey matter from now on no longer be grey. May you mean every word that you say. And from now on, may writing your lines be the way that you pray. And I wrote this, it's quite a long piece, and I really wanted to perform like in the Mecca of poetry. And at that time, for me, from what I knew, that was a place called the Nuyorican Poets Club, or the Nuyorican Poets Cafe in New York. And it's in Lower Manhattan. It's where a lot of poets that were Puerto Rican and from New York, that's why it's called the Nuyorican. Uh, and it's just a famous place where they have poetry slams all the time, and all the greats have performed there. And I wrote this poem and I started performing it around the place. And I moved to Melbourne eventually to pursue more poetry. And there was way more things to do there. And I performed every single, time I could down there. And this poem was part of that. And then eventually I raised some funds to go and perform in the States. And I performed at the World Individual Poetry Slam. And I came like 19th out of like 75 or so poets. And I was like, encouraged by that. And then I met a couple poets that were actually hosting at the New Regan, and they loved what I did so much. And they were like, you should come and perform. And like 3 or 4 years after writing that poem, all of a sudden I was standing on the stage that I dreamt of, performing next to one of the poets that I first saw on Def Jam
That's
Poetry,
some manifestation shit
a
right
guy
there.
named a guy named
Yeah.
Lemon Anderson. And part of the reason why I ended up there is because every time I performed that poem, somehow I got it in my head that if I performed the poem in Brisbane, in a backyard, at a random party, on a big stage, on a small stage, whenever I performed a poem, I performed it as though I was performing it on that stage that I wanted to perform on. And so in some ways, that stage kind of lined up with my performances, if you know what I mean. Um, and instead of going, one day I'm going to perform on that stage, but right now
No,
I'm in a backyard,
that's
so I'll just
straight
throw the
up
poem away.
visualization,
It's
which
like,
is
no. It's
works.
like, no, I'm not throwing any poems away. I'm performing this poem here to 3 people, like I'm going to perform it to 300 people or to however many people in that place. And so that happened. And flash forward another 10 years from then, or 8 or 9 years from then, after doing a lot of workshops in schools and winning the National Slam and quitting my job and still performing this poem, because by then it's become something that's kind of gained traction. When I was in New York, I filmed the performance. And so that poem went online, and the reaction of the crowd in the United States was also online to that same poem. And so people in Australia often, you would know, have this like cultural cringe. They don't love something until the US loves it, until another overseas audience loves it. So a lot of people here saw my performance of it there, and they were like, damn, we need to book you for this and that. So it also gave me a lot, that poem. And flash forward, someone in the education board has decided that that poem should be a poem that everyone in year 12 in the HSC
Oh
exams
wow, that's
in English
amazing.
for a
Yeah.
module called The Craft of Writing should study for their final
Wow.
exam.
So from
So,
like a dark period in your life where you weren't
bro,
this thing that
I wrote this thing to
yeah,
dream, as a letter to myself. And now I'm lucky and I'm honored
it's
that
in the,
that
it's in
poem is
the
now a
yeah,
letter to young people, a letter to other young people that they can
yeah.
also
I'm
believe
getting I'm
in
getting I'm
in
getting
their creativity.
fucking chills. Well, it's shit. My dog.
What's that?
My dog's hold on. Just my dog. I just saw him with his tail go.
Oh, gone out. All right.
There's a dog. There's a dog next door.
Hey.
It's a puppy. She steals it.
All right.
They don't appreciate that very much. You little monster.
Funny. So yeah, the story of that poem has become like a powerful story, and I've performed that poem hundreds of times, and it's become my reality. And so now this project with Tal
Help people
is
with that process.
now to kind of be like, all right, I'm going to come out. I'm going to come clean. I'm going to be honest. Like, this is a big part of what I do in between the lines. And that I've realized over time that I need to be careful with my words because they're really powerful. And what I consume, in the Islamic tradition during Ramadan, it's not just about fasting of food. They also fast words and music and everything else. They only listen to scripture for that month. And that's seen as a great cleanse, to have this process where you're only listening to certain things for that month. In many traditions, there is a consciousness of what we consume and what it does to us. And in this age where we are consuming more information, than ever, more information in a morning than our ancestors did in a month, then it says a lot about why we might feel scrambled, or why we might feel like we're not making any headway in our dreams, or why we might not be manifesting what we want. Or
I think you were saying before we started, or you were saying about the most the average American now has a 3 minute focus span with the 25-minute latency,
yeah, there's this
which is
great
crazy.
book. Yeah, there's this great book, Stolen Focus by
Yeah.
Johann Hari. Most people think that I would recommend to them some deep esoteric,
Eastern
book.
mystical
Yeah, which is cool too. But
Sufism.
if you read any book, this year, it's that one. It
Yeah.
really is crazy. Yeah, the average US worker, office worker, starts a task, gets distracted within 3 minutes, and gets distracted every 3 minutes on average. And it takes them 25 minutes to get back to the first task. And the effect that that's having on society, if we can extrapolate that to say that, a lot of the world is acting in similar ways, which I think is true for,
Mm.
a lot of people don't look at the back end of their socials, where you can actually see how many hours you're spending on that every week. We're losing books, we're losing paintings, we're losing literature, we're losing inventions, we're losing problem solving, we're losing cures for diseases, because there's a brain drain that's not a brain drain of. In Greece, there was a brain drain, and there still is in some capacity, because people become professionals and go to uni in Greece, but there aren't necessarily the jobs. And so they call that a brain drain. They're moving to Germany or to other countries to work in their industry, and Greece is losing great minds. Well, in this case, the whole world, in some sense, is losing great minds 1 minute at a time, by the amount of time that we're spending getting distracted, and inability to focus on our callings.
I'd noticed it myself. I used to read a lot. So I spent like almost most of my 20s and early 30s just like reading literature. Like I couldn't get enough of it.
Yeah.
And your sense of time, like if I think back to that
Mm.
period of my life, there's a real arc of time to the day.
Mm.
You could almost feel the sun creep across the sky, and you felt this expansiveness and
Totally.
that you sunk into. And then a lot of people will say that they feel like time's sped up.
Yeah.
Like what happens to like days, weeks, months, years,
Yeah.
particularly since after the pandemic.
Yeah.
Like everyone would say that, yeah, it just feels like the years are flying by.
Mm.
And there's some Eastern mysticism answers to that, saying that we're heading into different yugas and time does speed up.
Mm.
But equally, I think it's just look at the tech. Like because I now try and like make myself, and where it was really easy, I'd pick up a book previously and I'll just be immersed. It was almost like it was a good book you couldn't stop reading. You'd have to like, shit, I've just spent 5 hours sitting down reading.
Yeah.
Whereas now I have to make a conscious effort to read. And I know once I get over that resistance, it's easier. But I did it on the weekend recently, and I felt that same time come back, that same expansiveness of time. It's really different, as opposed to like, here's me doing a task, whatever that task is. Now I'm just going to quickly check my Instagram. 10 likes, great. Bit of a scroll, put it back down. And where have you just like invested your, like, where did you just go? And if you think about your whole day cut up with this distraction, and then people are feeling all these anxiety, frustration. So, because you're working on, Instagram's mostly advertising these days. I mean, you could look, it's a tool, you can use it for many different things. But
well, the problem is that they're valuable. The problem is that there's great value in these things, that we connect with friends.
Yes. Yeah.
Like if they were completely invaluable, then it wouldn't be hard to just drop it and be like, see you later. But there's people that make great livings from these things. There's people that connect with friends across borders. There's people that post about things that mean a lot to them and that educate people on the other side of the world. It's not that there's no value. It's that there's great value, and that keeps us in there. And with that great value, we're being manipulated to accept things that we would not normally accept.
We're not good at showing restraint, particularly with new technology. We've not yet developed the tools to pass that. Yeah.
Have great boundaries with it, and like you said before, something that you touched on, which I think is really, really important, is that I could say, I'm going to write a book, let's say, and I'm going to write the book, by writing for 2 hours every day. And I'm going to do it 2 hours a day for 3 months, let's say. If I'm getting distracted in those hours, it's not just that I'm losing part of the 2 hours. I'm also losing the train of thought that I have to get back into to move back into the point that I was trying to make to start to keep writing again. It's like the train is like chugging along very difficult, in a very, very difficult way to try and like get back into the groove of writing again and blah, 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 blah. If I set aside 3 weeks with nothing else but writing a book, I could probably get done in 3 weeks with zero distraction. What I would probably need 3, 6, or 12 months to get done if I'm trying 2 hours a day, but also getting distracted for part of that time and, not going deep with the book. And so there are people in the world. There's another good book, which I can't remember the name of the author, which is called Deep Work. And
Yeah, I'll find it, put it in the show
yeah,
notes.
that's also about this. And that talks about some people who wake up at 4 a.m. and write for 3 hours, and that's their deep work. Some people who go away to the woods, they don't work actually for 2 weeks, and they go away to the woods for one weekend and they get the same amount of work done that they would get in the woods with no distractions on 2 days, non-stop writing, than they would get trying to fit it in between kid drop-offs and all sorts of other things for 2 weeks with the family and other distractions. And so it's not just the time set aside, it's the momentum of going in deep with a topic. And I think that's actually why a lot of the content that we're seeing in the world is quite shallow, because we're juggling so many things and we're getting distracted all the time, and we're just regurgitating things and pain points and whatever else that people resonate with, and we think that it's going to work and hopefully it works, and then we're actually getting taught how deep to think or how deep not to think. And then you pick up a book and there's more depth on one page than in a month of scrolling, and you kind of that's a problem. That's a problem.
It's also a great way to win if you if you're focused and dedicated, because
Yeah.
you can. Well, I see it. You see it with everything. It's also everyone's just imitating one another with some subtle variation, without that complete. Because you're saying like even doing deep focus work and going away, but we also need time just to be bored and to let your
Yeah,
brain run free and
totally.
have nothing.
Yeah.
And we don't create everything is because our culture so much what's the word, reveres activity and doing, rather
Yeah,
than almost being
productivity.
productivity, rather than something I've been thinking about a lot in my own life because I've been so busy for years. I'm actually, and it's a cliche to say human doing as opposed to human being, but I'm not actually being, I'm
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah.
And it's like, where is the new, if you want a new life, you want a new way of
Mm.
being, you need to create space for that to emerge.
Yeah.
And if you're just consistently filling your days or
Mm.
even your headspace
Yeah.
with scrolling or doing.
Yeah. Wow, man, we could talk for hours. When you're talking, I'm thinking about my wife, who's taught me how to slow down a lot. She makes actually slow fashion. She makes wedding dresses by hand,
Yeah.
crochet. She gets
She could
women's.
outsource out to India some of it. You
Yeah,
know
yeah,
that.
but
I'll give her some
yeah, yeah,
contacts.
yeah.
Guys can make
She's
millions.
she's just like she's all about the time that it takes, and it
Yeah.
takes a long time, and the relationship with the
With the
bride, and the
garment. Yeah.
process, and
But
the
there's energy in
every hand, the energy in
there's
it,
energy in the fabric.
a hundred
There's
percent.
energy in all of this stuff and you can feel it. And
A
it's like,
hundred
what do you want
percent.
to
And we're being
value?
taught the opposite, quick is better,
Yeah, yeah.
mark it up,
Burn
you
it in
know,
Africa when you're done with it.
yeah, it's just, and a lot of women out there are looking for, I think there was a talk a while ago when Kindles came in that books were going to disappear. And in the end, it's not that people like books or don't like books. It's not that, this medium's going to go away. I think what people are looking for more and more as media and the things that we engage with get more meaningless, I think meaning is always going to be in fashion, let's say, that we look more and more for meaning. And so a book can hold a lot of meaning for someone that's come and seen you perform your poetry. They want to come home and they want to mull over it and consider it and sit with a cup of tea and have those moments that slow time down. And the same with a dress, like the ones that my wife makes, where she really is able to take on the history and the story of that woman and weave something that has meaning in it, and that can be really not just a wedding dress but an heirloom for generations to come. And it completely in today's day and age, I guess we can't really have this conversation about productivity and time without talking about capitalism. Because in today's age, it really is a revolutionary thing to say, you know what, I'm going to stop, I'm going to have a cup of tea, and I'm going to read a few pages of this book that feeds my soul.
We got 10 minutes, and we've got you tagged. So if you're not back,
Yeah.
when you're like literally there, they keep. I ran into a friend who was working at some awful corporate job. Sorry, perspective. That's my perspective. But they literally have to log in and out when they go for lunch.
Yeah.
So you can't even go for a stroll without being monitored. So your whole day is just monitored, and you're like, you're not a widget. You're a human being. Like, if you get
Well,
the work done, who cares? I don't care if you're sitting in Casablanca on the beach.
yeah. This is the thing. You're not allowed to enjoy yourself. The
No,
thing
no,
is, you
God
know what
no.
the interesting thing is about that, though? While we're talking, I'm just thinking that, like, no, you're not allowed to relax. You're not allowed to waste time. You have to be productive unless you're scrolling.
Oh yeah,
You know
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
that's,
Usually while taking a shit.
yeah, that's not seen as wrong,
That's so funny, isn't it?
even though it is a complete waste of time
Yeah,
most
yeah,
times. You can scroll for hours, you know what I mean? That's
yeah.
okay because we're
That's
getting your data.
relaxation.
We're getting information
Yeah,
from you. We're gaining
yeah.
something from that. And we are building things, spending billions of dollars building things that will distract you and trigger. It's like a complete slot machine that will trigger things that will make you waste as much time as possible. But it's wasting time in the way that we want you to waste time, that we get something from that. But if you're just taking a stroll, like Johan Hari now, from his research in the Stolen Focus book, he has scheduled in a half-hour walk with no phone, nothing else every day because it is completely productive in a sense that it helps those dots that he's trying to join to make his writing intricate and powerful. Taking a walk helps that. And that doesn't mean take a walk so you can be productive. It means we need spaciousness, man. We can't actually integrate all this information that we are getting every day properly and expect ourselves to produce beauty that helps humanity and that serves our purpose in life while our brains are so full of so much information that we can't actually integrate it, consume it, and then use alchemy to turn it into something that is meaningful and powerful for society. It's impossible to consume the amount that we consume and think that we can think straight and know our purpose. And like, it's just so much pressure, you know, like to learn everything and know your purpose and make a difference and this and that. Like, stillness for me has become a huge part of my life now.
There's so many threads. I want to touch quickly on stillness because it's meditation now is the thing I look forward to the most,
Wow.
which ostensibly is doing nothing.
Yeah.
In the framework of what we have.
Yeah.
Like that's my favorite beyond anything.
Great.
But like just sitting still and
Mm.
letting myself. I love the analogy of just letting the dust settle. Like
Yeah.
I'm not trying to get anything done.
Yeah.
I'm just letting the dust drop
Yeah.
and then seeing what emerges.
Mm.
And it's so. And I don't even like commoditizing it after that to say, well, after that, I'm so much more productive because I've got like,
Yeah.
fuck that. It's just a beautiful experience of being, we've lost that, like just the beauty of being in now,
Yeah.
of experiencing now,
Yeah.
as opposed to everything needs an end result.
Yeah.
Otherwise
that,
it's
bro.
not.
I love that, man.
But
I feel every time I sit down to meditate, I notice myself going, oh, it's okay. I can do this. I've got time. If I do this time, then that'll make me work better after. And blah, 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 blah. And I find that my meditation actually doesn't, let's say, in quote unquote, doesn't work if I have an expectation of it. And within the first couple minutes, I really, on my good days, remember I'm doing this for doing this. I'm not doing this for an outcome, to make me better, to make me closer to who I wish I was. It's like, no, I'm just here. That's it. I'm just here right now. And that, for me, something happens in that.
It's yeah. And look, to learn to meditate, it takes a lot. Like it's a battle with your mind because it's the last thing it wants to do. You got to train it to become where it knows that it's going to be nice to switch off. But yeah, initially, it took a long time to be able to do it. It starts with, I remember doing, it was hilarious. I remember like when I first learned about it 15 years ago and I'll do it. It's hilarious. I didn't, because I, God forbid, getting up early in the morning back then, I used to get up as late as possible.
Mm.
It's amazing how much you change. So
Now you're an early bird.
yeah,
Do you
super
think
early.
that's got to do with the less weight on your mind, like more clarity that you?
I just love having space before anyone
Yeah,
calls me, emails me, and I've got all this luxury of time
yeah, great.
to get the thing, just to align myself, like to or do some automatic writing, to meditate, to do anything.
I want to, before we were on here, I know you have a thread that I've interrupted, but I just wanted to mention that before we were on here, we are talking about brands and fashion and all sorts of things, and you said something about luxury and people pushing luxury, blah blah blah, and now you just use the word luxury again, like luxury of time,
Yeah, well,
and
which is the only luxury, really.
exactly, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Well, Eddie, if you think of why most people want an abundance of money, it's because they want that their time back. So like,
But
there's
don't
no
people buy things thinking that that's what it's going to give
yeah,
them, like
yeah,
the same
yeah,
feeling? Don't
or
people
for a whole
buy
bunch of
certain cars or certain,
yeah, yeah, all the
like I
emotional
always
state.
feel like nature is luxury as well as time,
Yeah.
because the most expensive house is on the beachfront, like
Oh yeah, and all the
like
most expensive houses are in
and the most
tree-lined
expensive,
streets.
like there's a lot of products in the world that are nature, like nature packaged, and that's a good thing, you know, and but people get kind of sidelined by something that is like greenwashed in a way that says that it's nature, but it's actually like a whole bunch of
No,
crap
no,
and
it's still
a leaf on the front,
petrochemicals.
or
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. So yeah, nature and time, I
the
feel
tag
like
was
are the
cardboard, so it was made from a tree,
yeah, yeah,
but
yeah,
the rest
exactly.
is
It's the packaging is
dinosaur
recycled,
bones.
but everything else.
I was,
Yeah.
I was just going to
Anyway,
say
you
for
were gonna say.
people. No, I was just going to say because you hear if I heard someone say I meditate for X amount of time, like a longer period of time, I'd go, that sounds impossible, but it's a practice.
Mm.
So I was just saying, like before, I would meditate for about 15 minutes. It was at night, so I'd sit. It was the hardest thing ever. I didn't want to do it. Wasn't feeling. I was feeling depressed at the time, so I thought
Yeah.
I needed to try something.
Yeah.
And it was the longest 15 minutes until
Mm.
it slowly became shorter and shorter. And then next thing you knew, you put the start timer on and bang, you go,
Mm.
shit, was that 15 minutes? But the hilarious thing with that, I'll do that and then I'll go to the bar. I'll
Yeah.
meet a friend for a drink. So it was the least, it's just funny how
I like
you,
that,
you
bro.
just need an aperture into there's other
I
ways of
I
being.
like that. I think that there's too much of a
Also in the spiritual
juxtaposition.
community
Yeah,
of,
there's
yeah, you
too
need to
much
be
of
a
a
certain way.
juxtaposition between like spiritual people do this, non-spiritual people do that.
Yeah.
Like I've known absolute, you know, amazing human beings who I, yeah, would consider the Buddhas that I've met in my life, and I really mean like some serious shit, and they're mostly not serious, and they're drinking Coke, and you would look at them and not even notice a certain thing. They're not wearing the robes. They haven't spent, hundreds of dollars on a yoga outfit. They are fully accepting of themselves, bro. And they forgive themselves for whatever mistakes they're making in the moment of making them. And meditating and going to the bar, meditating and I don't know, watching porn, like we are not
Meditative
necessarily,
porn.
yeah, not like necessarily at the same time,
Be quite
who
boring.
knows?
Be quite boring to watch.
Yeah.
Be very slow.
Yeah, I just mean that we're all fucked up, man. Like we've all got our shit. Like people chastise themselves and think
Yeah,
that
yeah. You're
they
not
need to all of a sudden you've been meditating for 3 years. You should have given up
got your
this
shit
addiction
together.
by now. It's like, dude, these addictions and traumas can come from generations. Like we've got a lot of work to do.
And we're
Like
on a path. It's all about being on a path that you feel like you are. Well, for me, it's in alignment, and whatever comes up, and it's not to
shit's
be
gonna
like,
come
oh,
up
I'm fine.
if shit's not coming up, then what do you got to like? There's that
Yeah,
saying, no mud, no lotus. Like what do you got to work with if you're not seeing yourself in the mirror and looking at the dark spots, and
yeah.
and the darkness is what helps us walk
Well,
towards the light, and I think that there's a lot of this kind of facade of spirituality,
mm,
or that it needs to look a certain way or act a certain way or be a certain way, and in reality, if we are fully accepting of ourselves, which is, self-love, I think is a tenet of
mm,
most spiritual practices, then we get the opportunity to really look at the things that we might judge and actually heal those things You know, the Catholic Church is a typical example. There's this piousness that is over here. There's
Mm.
this devil that's over there,
And they're
and
robbing
we
you at the same time.
yeah, and at the same, you know what I mean? Like there's this
It's this
reaching for the
ridiculous
light and a
polarity.
denouncing of the darkness, and in that there's no ability to heal because you're just like pushing away this
Yeah,
side, and that's the side that actually gets amplified because you're not working with it. You're not actually uh, healing the trauma, and so there's, you know, child abuse rampant in that institution, and we need to, yeah, I mean, I'm going way out on a tangent, but it's true because I used to chastise myself a lot about certain things that I did, and now it's like I'm doing something that is like the thing that I shouldn't be doing, that is like a whatever it might be, an addiction or a coping mechanism or whatever, and I'm like forgiving myself. I think it's important for those things and going straight to meditating straight after, because I used to do something and then be like, oh,
and then
I'm not
you
spiritual.
shame yourself.
Yeah, I better not meditate for a few
Yeah,
days. I can't believe I did that thing again. It's like,
yeah.
no, man, like the next minute,
Or you just get back on the bike.
back on the bike, brother,
Yeah.
back on the horse.
It's. I was going to say, when you're saying that, you made me think of a Henry Miller quote about it's not so much that men want roses, is that they don't look at the shit, and it's the shit that's the manure that makes the roses. Like, why aren't we like that? There's as much value in the beauty of the rose as there is in a turd, because you need both.
That's the fertilizer.
It's the fertilizer. You're not going to heal that, and what you put in darkness is just going to grow.
Totally.
And it's until you actually, have the guts and the awareness, look at that and bring it up.
Yeah.
And not be judgment. Like there should be no judgment. Like we're all fucked up in some, whatever that means. We all have this thing of intergenerational past lives, whatever that could be.
Yeah.
And as long as you're looking at it and you're working at growth, it is for me.
It's humbling, man. It's humbling because if you don't look at it, then you could easily put yourself on a pedestal and be like, oh no, I don't have stuff. And then you're above the other people.
Well,
but when you're like looking at your stuff directly in the mirror every day, then who cares what someone's wearing? Like that doesn't. I've seen in spiritual communities people judge someone that turns up in a suit and just be like, oh, this guy, he doesn't get it. It's like he could be, you know, more on the path than any of us. Who cares what he's wearing? And I've seen people in suits completely judge a hippie with dreads and whatever at you know, a festival, dancing around and free love, and go, oh, so irresponsible. It's like that's bullshit too. Who knows what that person actually is like, you know?
It's just that protective, that little things that we associate with to create our identity that we get so scared to let go of.
Yeah, and that's why I think
Rather than
coming back to the
inquisitiveness.
word, I think the word is so important because with the word, we're not basing our identities on who we're not. We're not just going, oh, I'm not that, and I'm not that, and I'm not that, and I'm not that, so therefore I'm this. It's like, no, who are you now? Like, what resonates with you now? Articulate it, say it. What do you stand for? What are your ethics? What are your morals? Can you sit with anybody in the world and have a conversation and like hold your limits to that person without completely throwing them out as though they are valueless? You know, my work at the moment, the show that I've been working on is called Agape and Other Kinds of Love. It's about the ancient Greek words for love. And there's philautia, which is self-love, and there's philoxenia, which is the love of the other, which is like the opposite of xenophobia. Philoxenia is the love of the other, the love of the stranger. And agape is like the ultimate love, a universal love that says that basically even my enemies are worthy of love, or worthy of existence because they exist. So if they exist, then there is something divine in them, whether I like to admit that or not, whether I like to see that on my worst days or not, whether I hate their opinion or I dislike their actions or I don't stand for what they stand for or they trigger me in some way. Still they exist, and because they exist, they are part of this universe. And if we believe in God or whatever it is, that they are worthy and that they are eternally worthy of redemption for whatever they've done. And that there is a soul in there, and that soul is somehow obscured by trauma or obscured by the actions that were perpetrated against them that then cause them to continue that cycle of violence. But in their deep, somehow under those shadows or whatever, there's like a pure soul. And filaftia, self-love, is a way of putting boundaries up. And I've found over time of like engaging with these types of love and thinking about them a lot and practicing them, I've found that if I'm able to put strong boundaries and clear boundaries with people, then I'm kind of able to hang with anybody, no matter if they're resonating with me or if they're on the same page with me or they dress the right way or they're part of my crew or they're Greek or whatever. Like I'm able to sit with anybody because I'm able to hold my ethical backbone in that arena. And that means I'm able to see their divinity in a sense. That's a strong word, and I know some people might be triggered at thinking of their worst enemy and divinity in the same sentence, but it's true. Like you can't. It's like an ultimate truth that we can't really deny. Like it's kind of gets to the point of illogical to try and deny that if you exist, then the universe has put you here for some kind of a reason, even if that reason looks ugly on the outside. And that same grace also needs to be afforded towards us, like to ourselves. And that's kind of what's been informing my work. And I guess since I wrote that first poem, May Your Pen Grace the Page, and I saw how the words really worked powerfully in that sense, perform poetry that was maybe more negative or painful, or actually not necessarily negative or painful, but like not in line with my actual truth. And I felt what that did to my life and to my spirit. Now this is kind of the stuff that I'm working with because I want my work to be, rather than just a rally cry, which it used to be, very political. And I still value that and don't denounce that at all. But now I feel like my work needs to be like a hearth or a fire for people to gather around and be warmed by. And that's kind of where I'm leaning towards now.
It's interesting with the talisman work that you're just talking about, having people write down like the incantation to themselves. I had a guy I spoke with who's done a lot of work with breaking. He basically can break any trauma and help people out of their trauma loops and heal all kinds of addictions. And the main methodology is that you break that, you crack them to let the light in to break that trauma. And then you have the people. So you've got all these negative associations in your life. So you're attached, your identity or who you think you are, to negative traumas or patterns.
Yeah.
And he just has them reattach their authentic identity, their soul, whatever it is, by writing down the things that they actually stand for and believe in. Like and say it like I am love.
Yeah.
I am caring.
Yeah.
So it sounds like a very similar method for people to actually touch upon deep within themselves their true being and their essence and start living more from that, which just shatters all these because it's a false identity. Like all these addictions and traumas are just things that you've actually subconsciously, more than often than not, taken on board and going, well, this is who I am. And it's a framing for your life, which is driving.
It's hard, man.
Oh, it's definitely. I just wanted, because something you said was really interesting about the social, and I'm tied into that.
Yeah.
So I think it will inform what you're going to say as well. Like how we don't think wasting time is scrolling. So you can sit and scroll and people will just be, it's like normal. Like there's a bus stop down here where all the kids get picked up from.
Crazy.
And I will, I'm going to overshare because it's kind of funny.
Please
I'll
do.
sit out on my balcony because I want to get the morning sun. And I'll be in my under, it's all right. So no police have turned up. I'll be in my undies eating my breakfast with my dog.
Yeah.
And it was only after been doing that for a month I realized, oh shit, there's a bus stop down there with all these kids. Is this cool? And then I look up, not one of them even has noticed because they're all on their phones. They don't even look at each other. They're not talking. They're just all staring at their phones like zombies.
Yeah.
And it's very
amazing.
Because if I think when I grew up, if there's a dude sitting like 100 meters away, that would be it would be hilarious.
Yeah.
Like there'd be something.
Yeah.
I have clothes on, people. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not weird.
At least right now.
At least right. Well, maybe not right now. But that's considered normal. Like no. Well, I think there's more awareness that that's not healthy. Like for sure, there's more.
Yeah.
But this is we adopt, and I'm tying this into all these frameworks. So I'm really passionate. One of my things is about I eat what would be considered an extreme diet. I don't think it's extreme at all. Like I eat like raw fruits and vegetables like that. I eat like a living food diet.
Yeah.
Because I'm into this stuff for a long time. But if you told someone that most people, they think, well, that's bloody, like, how do you do that? That's really extreme. Like, well,
Yeah.
literally things that grow from the trees,
Yeah.
they grow from the ground,
Yeah.
and I don't use fire. Like, I'll just put them in a salad or do all this other stuff.
Yeah.
But we have, and this can apply to all aspects of life, things which are completely natural. We have these frameworks over
Yeah.
what is either possible for us or what's normal, which are dictated by the society. More often than not, by very clever people who have thought this out. So you buy more of their stuff that keeps them in a position of power. And the more we can become authentically ourselves, and I think we were saying this before we started, the more uh, we could do every course under the sun, and there's great teachers and there's great things that we can learn. But ultimately, it's our path and our life, and the more we tap into that in the quietness and the spaciousness of being, the more we have the answers within.
I totally hear you. I think that I want to say,
There's a lot in there. Sorry,
no, I love it.
It was like three different things.
I love it. I think that the great thing about what you said is that there is a story around us all the time anyway. Yes. And we mostly don't notice it. The story that sitting on your phone and scrolling at the bus stop is normalized. That's a story. Like we've been kind of gotten to this point where it's like, cool, that's normal because this is happening. Social media's been around for a while, and the phone's kind of slowly crept into our homes, and now our kids have them because we need to keep in contact and blah 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 blah.
Shuts them
and you
up.
get to this point where it's like, exactly, you get to this point where it's like, oh, there's 10 kids at a bus stop not noticing what's going on around them. And people just drive past. They don't freak out. They go, oh, the phone's got them again, but they don't freak out, you know. And that's
And
the
what are
story.
they looking at too? Like that's the other thing.
Yeah.
Like, why are they putting into their fragile little heads?
Totally. And then to go back to what we're saying about the talisman work that I'm doing, and I want to just touch on the word talisman. And that is that the word talisman comes from an ancient Greek word, telos, which is still used in modern Greek. And telos translates today as end, as the end of something. But it actually, like a quality translation is that it's complete. So it has been completed. It has come to fruition. It has happened. It's done. Just like when someone might say a prayer and people might say, it is done. Or in Spanish, my wife is Chilean, they will say, hecho está, like it is done. Just as it is done in this way. And so it is like your friend that you were saying that does this work. All of the examples that you gave me were in the present tense. I am caring. I am love. I am. And this is important because it is the doing of it. It is happening right now. It has happened already. It's not like in the future, one day I might be free. It's like, no, I am free now. It is done. And that's really important. And what the kids are getting when they're scrolling is that doneness in whatever piece of content that they're getting. So the random bit of information about, I don't know, I've seen that young kids are watching these, like, have you seen, I feel so fucking old. My son's 3 and I already feel old. Like Riz videos, you know, like people trying to pick each other up type videos.
Yeah, no, I'm down with the kids, man. Don't worry about me. I am Riz.
Got the Riz.
Got the Riz.
I
got no
How many
Riz.
people are rolling their eyes right now?
I can't even remember the last time I tried to pick someone up.
Yeah, exactly.
Been in a relationship that long.
Exactly. So this is like their doneness. This is what they're getting. This is the identity forming in these moments. You know, this is identity forming. It is being formed. It is that. And so your identity is being formed by stories that are happening around you all the time. Anyway, you have to be. You are being exposed just by being alive. You're being exposed to so many stories. The stories that Australia was settled and not invaded violently. The story that, I don't know, you have to grow up to buy a house. You have to get married. You have to have kids. The story that if you're a woman, you have to act this way. If you're a man, you have to act this way. If you're neither of those, if you're uncomfortable with those labels, then you know you're lost and you don't deserve certain rights. Or if you whatever it might be, whatever the stories are, we have stories around us all the time. And the manifestation of, you know, writing a mantra or a talisman, the power of it is, you know, that, like the saying, you know, from the Bible, that in the beginning was the word. It means that you have the choice in you. You have the impetus within you. You have the autonomy and the agency within you to choose, like the words, to choose the story. And that is powerful. And I need to say that is really hard for some people. And I completely understand why, especially First Nations people. that I work with a lot of, and I have friends that are like family to me, because that is that I don't want to share that in a way that tries to diminish history or tries to diminish people suffering or tries to diminish and say you're not suffering, it's just a story. It's like, no, massacres happen, genocides have happened, poisonings have happened. Like, that's some real shit. I don't want to whitewash it or you know, do this kind of like avoiding of this reality that's
No, but it's also
super
like
powerful.
no. It's something I struggle with because it's often a if you say the word manifestation, it's so loaded for people because then
Totally.
it comes down to, and I've mentioned this a ton of times, it's misconstrued as only materialism. Like when you see
Totally.
it often, it's like people, hey man, I just manifested this place in Florida, and here's my pool, and here's my supercar,
Yeah.
and you know all you
Yeah.
got to
Yeah.
do is buy my course. And I probably did.
Sweet.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell me how. But manifest, as we've been saying, manifestation is story. So you're always manifesting, and it's not to deny that people are in dark times and there's not been horrific injustices perpetrated on all numbers of peoples. And you can, how long? What's the arc of time? Because all peoples have been had injustices put upon them,
Yeah. And the
and it's
people
not to
that are
diminish
perpetrating great injustices today or
were
usually
victims of
victims
that.
of great pain in the past.
But
And
how long do you want to? I was just going to say, like, if you can facilitate change in some way in your life, do you want to stay in the story of that trauma, or do you want to, because manifestation can be you're in a small village that's been war torn, but you're the person still holding love in your heart and optimism for a future. And if you look at the people who survived like prison camps, they're the ones who had an optimistic view that things would be okay and they would get out. And I spoke to an amazing woman who's a NASA rocket scientist of all things, amongst now doing like quantum healing and a whole bunch of other stuff. She was born in a small Pakistani village as a woman, where they usually try and get rid of the women. Was denied education, arranged marriage. Yeah, you have to listen to find out more. But she went through this thing, and if you had told someone, here's a woman in grown in a developing nation where they don't value women at all.
yeah.
No, sorry, obviously not everyone in Pac, but you know,
Yeah.
generally, she's now leading one. She's got the new mission to the Artemis mission to the moon. She's one of the leads on that as a rocket scientist.
Wow.
And it's all about how and look, she's an exceptional human being. We're all exceptional human beings, but
Yeah.
she knew from a young age that she had to tell herself a different story.
Well, that's what we touched on before we got on here, is that this idea, and it is true, it does happen, and still it's not to diminish, but actually to talk about the power of human experience and the power of resilience, is that a lot of people that go through the hardest times are like the most likely to be more successful in whatever way we want to talk about that. My family's family of migrants, you know, to know what they came through, to know what it was like for my grandmother to catch a boat and visit and come to Australia 3 months on a boat by herself.
Were they after the Second World War?
My father's side was after my grandmother on my father's side was after the Second World War, but my grandfather was before, so she didn't know him. They sent letters to each other because they had a mutual. Her sister was in Australia first, and my grandfather met her and said, if your sister's anything like you, she cleans and cooks and looks after her man, anything like you do, I'll take her. Which was, you know, romantic for the times. And they sent a photo and a letter to each other. And my grandmother took a bus to the other side of the island of Rhodos, to visit her future mother-in-law. Be like, hey, I'm catching a boat to Australia to marry your son.
Fuck, it's like really slow Bumble.
Really slow Bumble, bro. Really slow Bumble. And my great-grandmother, who was a really powerful woman, who was the midwife of the village, she gave her a few things to take, like as a dowry, to take back to Australia to use it setting up a house.
Could you imagine like getting your head around and it's like you're on a boat. It's a completely, and like Australia now comparative to back then.
She caught a boat to Australia.
Yeah.
And somehow got out to Billawheeler. My grandfather was in Billawheeler.
I don't even know what that is.
Picking cotton in Queensland.
Yeah.
And
how old? Because I know my ex-neighbour in Melbourne was Greek family, and she got married when she was 15. And it was arranged from Greece, similar story, and she had met Nick
Right.
who was
Well,
a
this is an interesting story. My grandmother had a very big heart, and rest her soul, she was a really sweet woman, and she had a sister who really wanted to marry a guy that was of a higher level of society to her, and her dowry wasn't enough. So what she had to give to bring to the wedding wasn't enough for his family to accept. And my grandmother said to her sister, because she could see that she was really in love with this guy and really wanted to marry him, she said to her, "You can take half of my dowry." And their dowry at the time was a block of land. And so my grandmother ended up with next to nothing. And so she wasn't able to marry. She wasn't able to have choices in Greece as to who she could marry and who she couldn't marry, because she not only had a low dowry for the upper echelons of society, but even for her own level, which was like peasant level, they were farmers. They had next to nothing. So she had less choices. And my grandfather, all the way in Australia, basically said, "I don't care about that. I don't care about less dowry. I care about whether she's going to work next to me, work beside me to build something here. And that she knows how to be a wife, knows how to be with me." They were old school. My grandfather never cooked a meal in his life.
oh yeah, that generation.
Super old school.
Like you saying that probably triggers a lot of people, but it's like no. That
It's
was that they
just,
were the times,
it
man.
was
Like
also
we're
it was
all
not just the times, it was survival, like they were very, very, very poor, and you had
yeah,
to separate. There's a certain level of privilege, I think, that comes
yeah.
that we have that makes us able to learn and
Privilege, outrage.
and unpack our misogyny as men, and
Yeah,
we have to be educated. My grandparents went to like level year 2 or something, and they survived in very hard times in
yes,
extreme poverty by having a separation of roles, and that worked for them, and they were very good at their things that they did, and they didn't have to learn everything about the house. And like my grandfather didn't have to learn everything about the house, and my grandmother didn't have to learn everything about working outside of the house. My grandmother handled all the money, so my grandfather didn't touch the money. So even though it was a separation of roles, she had control of the money. The money came into the house, went into her hands to
mm.
to make things work.
That's just sensible.
Um,
Like if you think of running a good business, that's how good businesses are
yeah, there's a
structured.
whole
It
bunch
goes
of
to the
things
best,
that.
and it's
Anyway,
not patriarch. It's not. We have all these labels for things that.
well, it was also
No,
patriarchal in a
I'm
sense,
not saying that time,
but
but
there's different definition. I guess there's different
everything
things,
is nuanced. Like we
Yeah.
have all these judgments based on the times, but like
You
God
would think
forbid.
he would earn the money, keep the money, and tell everybody what to
Yeah,
do.
yeah.
It wasn't necessarily like that, but he definitely, he was definitely sexist, let's say,
But think about what I often think about this. Like what happens
on
if
our terms of what that means right
well,
now.
no, like think about in 200 years how you're going to be perceived.
Yeah,
Like all the things that we just take for granted as a part of our culture that we're
yeah,
doing, how we're living, for example, just purely in this
yeah,
throwaway
totally.
culture. Like what are 200 years down the line and people are going to be slapping their heads about. So don't get too quickly on your high horse about
Yeah, totally.
behaviors.
And yeah, and 300 years before my grandparents, it was, even worse,
Mm.
much worse. So yeah, it's interesting, these conversations. A lot of people talk about the Odyssey and ancient Greek
Yeah.
mythology
Yeah.
in that through this lens of modern day relationships and rights, and I think that's interesting too, because there's some things in those texts that are way better for certain people of society than today, and there's other things that are way worse, of course, like misogyny and slavery and servants in the house and all sorts of things like that. But yeah, my grandmother caught a boat to Australia, went and met this guy in Billawheeler, and in 5 years they had 5 kids, and she'd never met him before. And the youngest is my dad. So yeah, it's a whole other odyssey that they went on, and so there's hard work in that too, and a lot of people that come from migrant families have this, I call it ethnic work ethic, that some other people don't, and that's a blessing, even though it came from hardship and it came from difficulty. That's my new interviewer here. It's asking me some
Yeah.
questions.
Speaking of not knowing hardship, you are the definition
Yeah.
of a cushy life. I really want to go back because I think it's a really very important point about and I'm gonna jump on the manifestation bandwagon
Yeah.
and creating your life because I think it's completely possible, and
Yeah.
it's what the world needs, more of empowered people creating from a place of love. So you said how you wrote that poem and you were already seeing yourself performing it. So like people be well aware of sports people visualizing themselves shooting baskets
Mm.
continually,
Winning a trophy.
and we readily accept that as that's well found science
Mm.
that works, and it
Yeah.
is. Yet they don't necessarily think of that being in their own life of like how can I visualize myself in this
Right.
position.
Right.
So there's two things, I guess. There's two questions. Like, well, that's more of a statement over how that works. Like that we know that works from a core scientific point of view.
Yeah.
But I guess as well, you're a poet. How on earth did you find the trust and the belief to say that I'm just going to do this? Like, did you burn the boats? Is it a case of like, I can't live any other? No, but I often think like
I
the
love that
energy,
saying.
well, you've got to do, because if you leave yourself a backup, I really can't. I've heard it so many times. Like, I did the law degree because it's a good backup. Do you like law? Hate it. What's it a backup for?
Yeah.
Like, you actually need to,
It's a good
the
question.
universe rewards commitment.
Yeah, there's lots of different ways of looking at it. I was lucky enough to be in a workshop with the poet laureate of the UK recently, Simon
Mm.
Armitage, and he actually
I know
said
Simon
that
Armitage, yeah.
his students, when they graduate from his course or whenever he's got students, he says to them, first thing you should do is go get a job,
Mm.
because he believes that it's too much weight on your words to have the pressure of income on
Just
your
straight away.
poetry.
Yeah.
And I found that interesting. For me, the experience was that I was teaching at university. I was teaching at Monash. I was involved in it, at the Indigenous Studies Centre there. I was teaching basically colonial history of Australia. And I really had this like feeling in me that I just wasn't in the right place, I guess. I loved it and I loved the work, and it was very meaningful and very powerful. And I was performing, 2, 3, 4 nights a week, every week, just like burning the candle at both ends, working and performing, working and performing, working and performing. And I won the National Poetry Slam at the end of 2011. I still had that job. And I was at this point where everyone was kind of like, or at least the voices in my head, which I should blame more than anyone else, was saying like, it's too much of a risk. It's too much of a risk. It's too much of a risk. Can't quit your job now and go out and be a poet. You don't even know how to do that.
Particularly a good university
What
job.
does, yeah, a good university job, you're tutoring. I was teaching, 3, 4 days a week. I got a teaching award. Like I was good at it. It wasn't like I was stacking shelves at Woolies, like I had a job, a good job. And there was something in me that was just like, you know what? The bigger risk is if I never take the risk. Like that's the risk. The biggest risk, like I was thinking like, what's the worst outcome? What's the more bad outcome? What's the baddest outcome? Is it to do this for 10 years and go like, all right, it didn't work? Or is it to sit here in this job for 10 years and go, I never did it and now I can't? Or I never did it and I'll never know. Like that was the bigger risk for me at that point. It might have only been by 1% of a bigger risk, but it was the bigger risk. And so I was like, I have to do it. It's better to regret something you've done than something that you've never done, something that you're never doing it at all. And so I was just like, fuck it, I'm going to quit. I'm going to do this thing because that really does actually, in my gut, feel like the lesser risk of these two risks. And so the end of 2011, I just didn't go back to work after that because, the end of the year came. I was actually teaching by that time also like a first year criminology subject. And I was like, yeah, I'm not coming back. I'm quitting my job. And I met this great poet, rapper from Sudan who now lives in Canada. His name's Emmanuel Jal. He was a child soldier and he had this amazing story of being taken from Sudan. And I met him at Sydney Writers Festival. And I was like, bro, how do you do this? Like, how do you become a full-time artist? How do you tour the world? Like you've got a book, you're doing all this stuff. How do you do this? What do I do? I thought he was going to give me some big like Instagram quote, like follow your dreams or you'll be fine or whatever. And he said to me something really tangible and measurable, which I never forgot, and I took on like a absolute, rule. And that is, he said to me, do 100 gigs a year. Do 100 gigs a year. People will get to know your voice, your name, your poetry. You'll have to write more poems in order to perform. You can't just perform the same poem every night. You'll, get a crowd. You'll have video. You'll have video. You'll have photos. You'll have a movement in a sense. You'll get better at what you do, much better than at what you do, and you'll be doing it. So
You just said dog pickups,
yeah, that was
dog
awesome. Good little
pickups
break.
plus.
And I was thinking that yeah, we were on the
We were
moment.
talking about manner. You're talking about the moment of leaving. No, you were saying something really beautiful about the.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah, no, that was
It
shit.
wasn't that beautiful. No, I
But
think it was about manifesting, and we kind of basically
no, but
touched on the fact
you
that
said like the risk of the
yeah,
not taking a risk.
right,
Like I love the thing of I love that there's a saying not taking any risk is a risk,
hmm.
which is basically and what's the worst thing that could happen? And I love there's an exercise that I did years ago when I was really stuck, and it was you actually write down, you go to like because in your mind if you just leave it to run on autopilot of all the things that could happen,
Yeah,
because we're trained to look for the negative,
yeah,
it can just go. That's the kind of
you're in
shit that
trouble.
keeps you up at 3 a.m. Whereas if you actually sit and you write down all the things like, okay, this is the thing I want to do. What's all the worst case scenarios? And you realize, okay, what would happen if this worst case scenario played out?
Hmm.
Oh, I could actually. It really helps you process in your mind,
Hmm.
and it's a really pragmatic basic tool. And then I think we're also saying the advice you got, which was to
Yeah, so
do
it was
that
100
100.
shows, and then I did
Yeah,
100 shows, and then I did 1 year I did 200, and it really did, it worked in big ways. And that's the thing about the whole manifestation thing. I think it can be seen as like complete fluff, and I think it should be seen as complete fluff when it is just the words and no actions. Yeah, it's just you. I'm gonna act like an idiot. I'm gonna treat people terribly. I'm gonna laze around on the couch, but I'm gonna manifest for half an hour every morning. You know what I mean? Like it's like, all right, bro, you gotta actually do the work. And I've worked really, really hard to be what I am today, to be a full-time poet. And it's not just about working hard, it's also about working smart. It's also about, yes, meditation and clearing space and focus and doing things that you really believe in, and learning how to say no as an artist, I think is really important. There's many facets to it, but it's not just I'm going to manifest this career out of thin air. Actually think, yeah, the big power is also, in the actions and the feelings and the connecting and performing, and just really, if you're doing it, you're doing it. You know what I mean? Like if you're practicing it, you're doing it. Actually, Simon Armitage also said in this workshop, thinking about a good idea for a poem is not the same as writing a poem. Like an idea is not the thing. So to manifest your life, actually do the things. Like if you want to be a painter, paint, you know?
but the beautiful thing about that is you're removing the roadblocks because it's the thing that's coming from your heart,
Yeah.
hopefully. Like, so it doesn't, so when you're working hard, it's something that you actually enjoy
Yeah.
for the most part.
Yeah.
Whereas I think doing the thing that you don't want to do, even less, is a lot harder.
Right.
Dragging yourself to a job that you don't really care about.
Totally.
And I guess that's where the epidemic of endless scrolling comes from. Because
It's
people
an
they
avoidance
want a
mechanism.
distraction from the thing that they're not meant to be doing. You are meant to be doing after your talos, your highest good. You're meant to be like at that thing.
Mm.
Because I believe we're designed to do, and that doesn't need to be something grand. It could be something
No.
it could be something very
Oh, no.
lo-fi.
Totally. I
But
think
it's
everyone has whatever ability anybody has, it can be used as a form of activism. It can be used as many things, like there's plenty of organizations in the world, for instance, that really make a difference to the world, but they need a good accountant, they need support on
yeah,
many levels.
great lawyers. We need all these people, and you can, as you were saying before, we have judgment. There's judgment even in that community over what manner, like what that looks like for you to manifest your dream life. It's me being an influencer and being a life coach. It could be that you're a really great I don't know, shop assistant, and you really love helping people, and you love it.
Totally, man.
It's so funny how we frame everything needs to look a certain
Yeah,
way.
that's like when you go and you get a past life reading and you're always like a king or
Oh, for sure, yeah.
you're never like
I was a cat.
you're never a slave or you're always when you're manifesting it's always like, oh, I'm gonna be this person.
Dude,
And
I was buried alive. I had one. I had the Dolores Cannon. I don't know if you know her work.
you really did I've never actually done.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I'm down
You're
for all
in
that
you're
stuff.
down
And
for all of it.
oh shit, yeah. No, but it was funny because I always had trouble with. I don't like. I like the ocean, but I don't like swimming because I don't like not being able to breathe.
Right.
Like from a really young, and
Sure.
born in Australia, you're generally thrown at a pool quite
Yeah.
early, so it's not like it was weird for me.
Mm.
But and then it was ironic that I heard that I was buried alive, and that makes some sense that I'm so terrified of not being able to breathe.
Mm.
Yeah. Anyway,
Wow.
I
Interesting.
wasn't anyone famous. I was just like
And
someone didn't like
after you
me.
got that reading, did you like walk out and go, that was completely legit?
No.
No.
No, look, I feel that there's definitely look, there's so much we don't know, and like I like listening to near death experiences and hearing about
Yeah.
just from a place of like catharsis and like to hear, oh, that there's so much more to life and life goes on and all the stuff that we intrinsically are drawn to because it gives us continuity and we're all terrified of whatever this might be ending.
Yeah.
And it's also, I just feel there's some part of me that feels that that's, you can resonate, like with words, you can resonate when someone's telling you the truth from their
Yeah.
heart. And that feels very true to me. But I didn't, for me, yeah, I did that and I didn't get that feeling of that was overly beneficial. Like I feel like what's more beneficial is being present in this life and digging through to things in real time as opposed to be given some grand brushstroke of you're Caesar and that's why you're a megalomaniac.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting, hey? Like some of us can use yoga or, whatever practice it might be, and it might really be like a real healing, whatever it might be, whether it's going to a psychic or going to a doctor or going, whether it's mainstream or not, like you're really going in to like heal something and the focus is there and the clarity is there and you follow through and you might actually benefit. And then sometimes the same person could go to, someone else or a different person could go to your doctor or whatever. And you're doing the same thing, but you're actually using it to avoid your healing, like there's a lot of people that are like super addicted to drugs or other substances in the early age and then they get super healthy but they approach their health in the same way. It's like this hardcore addiction, like I'm running 40 miles or more every morning and then they get to like 40 or 50 and they've got cancer or they have a heart attack. It's like, why, I'm so healthy, look at me. It's like you're actually chastising yourself
The
with
energy's
the
the same.
health
Yeah.
practice. The energy's the same, that's right. Like it can be an addiction, it can be another coping mechanism or an avoidance mechanism to avoid yourself, to avoid sitting with yourself and looking at yourself in the mirror. You feel like, or it could be a way of like some people just don't like themselves. And so they have to look perfect all the time to feel accepted, even by themselves in their own eyes. There's so many like levels and so many things going on in people's lives and minds. I love that actually, that everybody's so different and this, you can do one thing and it can mean something completely different to you than the next person. But I think that we need to get a bit deeper as a society about what does health, look like, and not just in a level of like, I've got abs and I'm drinking smoothies. Like that might be good for one person, but it might not be good for you. It might not be good for every person.
There's so many
And
pillars to health. It's not physical health. Like
totally,
you could have that. You could look that perfect thing, but like you're distraught
100%,
and you're depressed, like ultimately depressed, and you're trying to live this ideal that's impossible.
100%. Or you could be looking like that and be absolutely fine and really loving it and enjoying it,
Totally,
and it's
like it's all
perfect for you.
yeah.
Like it's actually authentic. I
Mm.
think that's the word for me, authenticity.
Mhm.
Is that authentically your journey or not?
Mm.
And sometimes poetry as a journey, I've been like, oh, that's it, like I'm out, I'm gonna go do something else, but it's just me. It's just like who I am. It's embedded in whoever I am, and it's not a choice. I didn't wake up and go, oh, I want to be an architect or a lawyer or a dentist, or no, maybe I'll be a poet. It wasn't like some career choice. It
Yeah.
was really like, this is what I need to be doing. This is who I am. and around poetry, there's all sorts of things like there's theater and there's touring and there's workshops and there's teaching and there's facilitating other people's stories and there's supporting the healing of people through story, and there's all sorts of things that go with it. But at the nexus, poetry is the thing.
Mm.
And I know because part of me was hurting when I was doing other things. I could feel that I wasn't even on my own path.
Mm. But it's beautiful that you listen to that, because it's easy to stuff that down.
It really is. And I think that a lot of people stuff it down and avoid it because they think it's impossible. But actually, like, the impossibility of it is like the power of it, in a sense. Like, people ask me, what do you do? I get in a taxi. What do you do? I'm a poet. It's like, it becomes like the coolest shit, even when, if that taxi driver's son said, I want to become a poet, the taxi driver would be like, hell no, there's no way, but there's power in the impossible, there's power in the doubt, there's power in the struggle, for someone to come and be like, anyway,
But it's also, there's power in another person holding the torch and
Yeah.
walking into unknown lands.
Yeah.
So if you say you knew one poet in Brisbane, or there's one place to perform, and now it's easy for the next person to say,
Yeah.
well, Luca did it.
Yeah.
I know someone who actually has done it. Or that taxi driver, if their whatever child turned around and said, I wanted to do that. So, well, I actually met someone who's doing it. It didn't look like he was living on the street.
Yeah.
You're giving them and I think that's why it's so important to step into the unknown.
Yeah, I say sometimes to the young people that want to be full-time artists or poets, I say, the best thing you should do is like go buy a machete and like head straight for the forest and like carve your own path, because there's no right or wrong.
Yeah.
Like, you could look at me and be like, I'm going to do it like him. It's like,
No.
not really. Like, your journey is your journey, your voice is your voice, and poetry is such a delicate thing, it can easily just fall flat if
Yeah.
you veer off your path or your tone changes and you start talking in a way that's not authentic to you. It really is a great barometer, And so every poet, every artist has their own language, has their own way of being, has their own story, and that should inform the path and the way you carve your path. And it should be yours, completely yours. There's some tips and rules, I could share, but for the most part, I'll probably get pleasantly surprised if somebody followed the opposite of my advice and found their way in a different way. There's some poets that only live online and they never perform. And that's cool. They get to stay home and write their poems and post them and get famous and sell books. I need an audience. I'm a performer. I like to connect with people in presence. And that's powerful for me. That's an integral part of what I do. And so I can't deny that. I can't pretend. I start getting bored, sitting at home. I start feeling like my muscles, my performance muscles getting weak, like I need to get back on a stage somewhere, even if it's just to one person or to a bunch of trees. Like, I usually go out and, practice by myself somewhere just to keep the muscle working. Everyone's different, and there's no guarantee of anything. And every time I've thought about quitting, or I've come close to the edge and gone, oh, this is, I'm having a hard time or something's going wrong, every time I recommit, it's always a good thing. And I recommit in a new way with better focus and better clarity.
Just from but it's also the thing of wanting the solidification. It's that thing like, I'll believe it when I see it, as opposed to I'll see it when I believe it.
Yeah.
It's the complete, and it's that trust, and it's to say that, no, I need to know I'm going to be successful at this, otherwise I'm not going to try. And that's where we get so stuck.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, you could, sure, you could try being a singer. That may not work out for you because it's so slim, or being an actor, or pick whatever that industry is, the slimmest chance to actually get to the top.
Yeah.
And you could do every manifestation tool and do all the courses, and you don't do it. But guaranteed on that journey, you'll discover something else, which is incredible, which is for you.
Yeah.
But if you never embarked and you just took the safe job, you're guaranteed to be miserable.
Yeah. And you might not reach the aim. Like, you might not reach this like idea that you have in your head. Often these ideas in your head, our heads are not necessarily actually who we're meant to be, but they might be informed by something else or an expectation or whatever. And sometimes they're, legit. But the gift that you get is who you become. It's
Yes.
not just
Yeah.
the peak of the mountain. You know what I mean? Everyone wants the peak of the mountain, but actually, what you should be desiring is what we should be teaching people to desire, especially young people, is actually like the character that you build in the process of reaching for something. Who you become is, in some ways, more valuable than the big outcome that everybody sees and claps and standing ovations. Who you become is what you pass on to your children. It's what you pass on to the people around you. It's your legacy in some ways. It's your influence on the world. It's who you become in the process of being the artist or whatever it is. And there's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of fluff in the new age world. But one thing that pops up every now and then that I actually do resonate with is, and I think you were kind of leaning towards it, is this idea of starting before you're ready. Like don't be like, oh, when I sing really well, then I'm gonna do a gig, or when like my show's about the ancient Greek words for love. I'm not an expert on the ancient Greek words for love, but I wanted to learn about the ancient Greek words for love. And I knew some of them because I'm Greek and I've, grew up with some of them around me. And I knew that there was this thing, but I'd never studied them or looked into them or practiced them or read about them. And I got approached by La Boite Theatre in Brisbane and Bleach Festival on the Gold Coast to do like a co-commission to create a show, a solo theatre show. And I was like, they're like, what do you want to do? And I had like all these options. And they said, well, which one do you want? Because we don't want to actually tell you what you should do. And I said, I want to learn, I want that. And the decision was not based on, I think that's going to be the best show. The decision was, that's the one I want to learn about the most. And so all of my projects basically are me going, who do I want to become? Like, what do I want to learn? What do I want this journey of art to inform in terms of my psyche and my humanity? And in this case, I wanted to learn about the ancient Greek words for love, and I wanted to practice them and then see what happens when I get on stage and embody them in a way. And does it actually transfer to the audience? Do they leave feeling love in their hearts? Do they leave feeling uplifted? Can that work? Is that possible? And that's like I guess, the more esoteric reading of my work, that there's stuff between the lines that I want to share with the world and with myself. And together we get to like grow by them witnessing me embodying the learning that I choose. But I'm not an expert. I didn't pop out the womb just because I'm Greek. I know everything about Greek history, like it's just that I want to know. And so I design my life and the projects of my life to help take myself to a self-directed university and jump in the deep end. And there's all of a sudden there's like it's like, oh, I think I want to do that one. And it's like, cool, the premiere is booked in 6 months or 12 months from now. Good luck. It's like, and I work better that way. If there was no deadline, if there was nothing to work towards, if there was no project, I wouldn't just sit around learning things kind of for no reason. For me, it's all about learning and sharing and learning and sharing and reflecting and sharing. Yeah, and that way, when there's a premiere booked or a deadline, it's like, all right, I'm coming, I'm ready, I'm working towards that goal. So good. Different now that I'm a father, because my deadlines used to be like, all right, cool, deadlines, in 3 months. I'll just procrastinate until, yeah, until the week before or 2 weeks before. And then I'll just go all out and I will just work 24/7 for 2 weeks straight and make this beautiful thing. But I can't do that now. I'm a father. I can't disappear on my family for 2 weeks. I can't be unreliable in the mornings. I can't be, that's my story. It's not everybody. Everybody has different relationships and different negotiations. But for me, like, I want to be there consistently for my family and not go into this habit that I used to have when I was single and at uni and whatever, of just procrastinating and then just diving in, and forgetting about eating even, and forgetting about everyone else in my world and just being 100% focused on this thing. Now it's different. I have a responsibility that I've chosen and it's been my choice. So it's my choice also to learn how to work in different ways to get the same results or even better results. I used to be a bit superstitious about my work and think that it needs to be a certain way for me to get results because that's how I had only ever done things. But actually now I realize that I can make amazing things in the 10 minutes between, I don't know, the 10 minutes where I give my son some passion fruit in the morning to eat, and he's like busy. I'm like, oh, I got this idea, and I'll like write something, and it's awesome. I didn't have to have a candle burning and an incense and a certain
Yeah, yeah.
song, and
It
it has to be
comes.
from
Yeah,
6:36
yeah,
to 6:56 in the morning, and the sun rising at this angle, and like, nah, man, the poetry's everywhere.
yeah.
It's accessible at all times. Yeah, it doesn't
Was
have to be
so
perfect.
it's like one part of it is putting in the work, and the other part is just letting it come to you and flow. Was that great? I think of Tom Waits when he said he was driving and a song,
Yeah.
this song came to him. He's like, "Ah, man, I'm
Yeah.
fucking driving. Give it to somebody
Yeah,
else."
you just go to Bob Dylan or
Go to
something.
Bob.
Get
Yeah,
get
it's
out of
like,
here. Yeah, I love that. I love and also Picasso has a cool quote that's not really the same, but he says inspiration does come, but it has to find you working.
yeah.
So, you sit at the desk anyway, even if you're not really feeling it. And then there's other poets that like there's some poets that I know of.
Emily Dickinson, I know, like just channeled everything.
Yeah, some poets are just like, I never sit down and force myself to write. I only write when it comes, and it comes. And when it does come, I respect it and I write it down, no matter where I am or what I'm doing. But I don't have it like 9 to 5 is writing time now. Yeah, and then other people, especially novelists, I usually like set aside the time. I think Neil Gaiman said that he sets aside the time to write, uh, and he has to sit there, and he can do one of two things. He can either write or he can do nothing. But he but he can't fill up the nothing time with anything else. It's either you're just sitting and doing nothing or you're writing. And if the nothing comes, then you can just sit there for 3 hours and do nothing. If that's what you need. But you're not allowed to turn to your phone or turn to something else and try and get, productive again on other things. And that's coming back to that same book from before we were talking about. It's like leaving that spaciousness. That spaciousness is vital for the creative. I find it very difficult to go from writing 10 emails to, switch into writing poetry. Like, no, my poem's going to sound like an email.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
You also have
there
a
needs
certain amount of
space.
energy. Like I notice in the morning, like really selective of what I jump into first because I
Yeah.
have a certain amount of fuel, like really good fuel, like the high
Yeah.
octane fuel.
Yeah.
And then I've got the stuff which is, I know I'm going to be fumes later on.
Yeah.
So it's like, that's the other key that it's really helped change my life. It's like, what's the thing you want in your life the most? That's the thing you do first. So you
Yeah.
need to create that space in your life to do that thing first when the juices are most flowing, whatever that, for me, that's morning.
Mm.
And then everything else can come. It's not to say you disregard everything else, but you're not going to create the life you want by giving all your best energy to the thing that you don't want.
Yeah.
You got to start giving it to the thing you want.
Totally. I think that I would like to believe that listening to other people's opinions and stories about how to work is something that I can just apply to my work and then get results. But I often find it's more like it helps me expand my mind as to what's possible and what some people are doing. Some people are up at 2 a.m. with jelly beans. Yeah. And like some people, I actually benefit a lot from taking my notebook and going like kind of cafe hopping, especially when I was living in Melbourne. I would like walk out the door, find a cafe, do a couple hours, walk for half an hour, find another cafe, do another couple hours. And
You're
that
like Fred.
walking
You're like Fred
time,
again.
Fred again, what's that?
Oh, he's the musician. He writes everything from. He would just go and sit in parks
Oh,
and
yeah?
on the laptop and
Yeah.
use the sounds from what happen.
Oh,
Some
nice.
people really need that. I'm the same.
I
I need to
like
go
being
out
in
and
a space with other
have
people,
things.
but
Yeah,
not too loud. Like it's like this weird medium. It's like not too loud, but a few people, but not interrupting me. But but there's something about the movement like around me that I enjoy, rather than being isolated in a office at home or whatever. But that's just come from discovery, from testing, from practicing. I think people need to trust their guts a little bit more and try things out a little bit more and see what works with them. Like see what works for their personality, for their vibe. Some people, I think they take it for gospel, like this writing advice, when actually the best thing, my writing advice is like to actually just experiment and play with and put yourself in even sometimes uncomfortable positions that you normally wouldn't. and see like what's possible, like push your boundaries of what's possible with your writing. Write up the page instead of down the page. Write, I don't know, like write in a noisy space. Write when you're tired, even though you're telling yourself you need to go to bed. Sometimes, like you're saying, your practice of clearing your mind, I get better sleep if I spend an extra half hour at night meditating, or an extra. It's like 11. It's 11 p.m. and I'm like, oh, I have to go to bed, but I've been working up to like the last minute. Actually, if I meditate from 11 to 11:30, I sleep better and I wake up more refreshed instead of panicking and going, I have to go to bed right now with a busy mind. So just experiment. Like, I think that people don't trust themselves enough, and we have a lot of knowledge inside of us if we actually really get to know ourselves, and you can only do that through trial and error, and be comfortable with making mistakes and having things not work, because that's like integral information. Knowing what doesn't work for you is awesome.
And the key there is you need to learn to trust yourself. I think we're
Yeah,
in trained to always look to others. As you said, like you're not the expert on Greek words for love, but you still went, and that doesn't
yeah,
prevent you from doing it. Whereas a lot of people let these things prevent them because they think it's for other people when it's actually for you to claim.
yeah. And there's so much noise because we're so busy, and there's so many notifications and things going on in our lives. We really can't hear our inner voices. We really can't hear the advice coming from within. Like, we can't hear our intuition. We can't hear our feeling of like, I want to walk that way. Like every moment we get a choice of words to use, of places to be, of people to interact with. And if you're not connected with your gut or your intuition, and then needs to be space in order to connect with that, then like kind of running around in circles. I used to a lot, and I guess I'm kind of inclined to, because I love people, to like follow people online and follow their advice and buy a course and whatever. And I've kind of realized that actually, if I settle into myself and I really create space, the answers are around, without needing to look far and without needing to throw myself into something that actually ends up being more of a distraction. And that's, again, because of this culture that's all about hustle, hustle culture, hustle, hustle, learn more, think more, do more, create more relationships, more this, more that, more that, more that. Actually, I think that for me, and I don't want to talk for everybody, for me, that creates like a disjointedness between me and my own self, in a sense, because I'm so busy, I don't have space to hear my spirit, or hear my intuition, or hear my family, really hear my son's crying and having a tantrum. And I'm, when my head's busy, I'm more likely to react to the tantrum. When my head is clear and I've got spaciousness and stillness in my life, I'm more likely to see what he's trying to say underneath the tantrum, and I actually see him for the fact that I just went on tour for a week and he missed me, and that's what he's really saying. Or he didn't sleep well, or he's hungry. There's things under the tantrums that we have to see to really see our children, and not react as though it's an attack on us. And I can't do that when my head is full of clutter. And and so it's very simple, advocating for nothingness and stillness. But actually, it takes us further, because so many of the distractions that feel like we're achieving, they're actually distractions taking us on tangents that we don't actually need to be on. But the stillness can be like, all right, I'm going to go from point A to B. That's I know who I am because I've got stillness. I know where I'm going, and I know what to write, and I know what I want to speak on, and I know what I believe in, and I know what I don't believe in. And that came more from stillness than I think from listening to lots of other people. And so it might be a much slower journey, because everyone thinks they're not achieving anything when they're still. So it's a much slower journey, but it's a clear and articulate and incremental journey to the right place, And so it's faster.
It's faster.
It's like
Yeah, I was going to say it's
much
faster. Yeah,
faster.
because you're not getting pulled in a million different directions, which aren't you. And sometimes we
Exactly.
need those teachers and those courses to give us the confidence.
Totally.
Like
Yeah, I'm not
they're a vital
saying
part, but at some point you do need to. And I'm speaking purely from my own experience, you need to let go of all of it and go, I've learned enough. Now it's time just to
Yeah.
drill deep
I
into.
guess maybe I'm being a bit too harsh. Maybe you're right. Like maybe it is more about actually.
No, but we see it with self help, whatever it is. People get addicted to that without actually ever. It can become another crutch, but it's like everything.
Yeah.
It's nuanced. Like sometimes you do need those people.
It's like some in poetry and writing, sometimes I say that, it's great to use writing to heal, but there's like a
Exactly.
line between catharsis, which is
Mm.
actually from a Greek word, kathara, which means to cleanse.
Yeah.
There's a line between using your writing as a cleansing, in a sense, and using your writing to re-ingrain a trauma and talk about it over and
Yes.
over
Yeah.
again and
Yeah.
make it
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
part of who
Hence,
you
hence
are.
talk therapy and
And so there's, yeah,
10 years of talk therapy, and you're like, really, 10 years?
so there's a line between that, and I can't tell you where that line is. Only the people doing it can tell
Yeah. Yeah.
themselves, can find out for themselves, where is the line where I'm getting this out of my system or I'm re-ingraining it.
Re-ingraining that trauma.
And the same with this. Only you can really tell the line between, are you cluttering your mind with information, or are you gathering enough information that really serves you, that is being able to be integrated into your system and applied as a habit in your life and really benefit things that are going on in your life. And only you can decide that. And sometimes, and often, actually not sometimes, we always actually need to cross that line in order to know, really, don't we? I guess I can say that I've crossed that line. You might cross that line in micro ways every day. um and and so it's all a part of the dance. But I guess what I'm saying is, like, stillness isn't valued enough, I think. And that's the well of where creativity usually comes from, where you've made space for the inspiration to come through. A lot of people have talked about, in ancient times, inspiration is like a spirit, like entering you. Um, and so I think that you need space for that to happen. And when your mind is cluttered and there's so much information going on, and then you're wondering, like, why can't I write this poem? Oh, this is so frustrating. Like, sometimes to memorize a poem, I'll just meditate for like 2 hours and then memorize it in like an hour and a half. And other times my mind will be cluttered and I'll be like, no, I have to memorize it now. I don't have time to meditate. That's so immature. Memorize it now. And it takes me like 3 or 4 hours because my mind is so cluttered. It hasn't got space. And that's a prime example of how valuing stillness and clarity and spaciousness can actually make things quicker, more often than not. Uh, but yeah, it's counterintuitive to the culture that we're living in at the moment.
I think it will change because if we talk about nutrition, physical nutrition, and all these other pillars of health, it's also like, what's your information diet?
Yeah.
Well, what are all these things you're consuming and how are they affecting you?
Yeah.
So it's all one huge space you need to look at.
Yeah.
And I think it will be. I really hope, touch wood, it does feel like there's a movement away. There's definitely more awareness of what's happening to us, and there's a movement, and it always swings in these huge bell curves, like of where we'll hit the peak of it, and then the generation after will be another extreme.
Yeah.
I mean, who's to say with AI? I mean, I've got absolutely no idea.
Yeah. I went and taught at a school, a fairly wealthy school in Sydney recently, and they announced that they were going on a camp and they would be away for 4 days and there would be no internet.
My God,
And one of the kids
started
who had
crying.
the resources was so freaked out by the proposition of living for, I don't even know, actually, it might have been less than 4 days, but for living for, say, 4 days max without the internet and without his phone, that he went and bought a Starlink and took it to camp so that he could keep gaming and keep connected to his devices. So he, as a child, doesn't actually know
What space is?
what spaciousness and stillness
Yeah.
is like. And in that case, I mean, this is, a jump to just diagnose someone from that. But to know that it's such a crutch that the thought of being without it for that long means something. There must be also a fear of being by yourself, a fear of being with yourself. And that, for me, is like a foundational part of being alive and finding your true path in life. So this is why my work, I feel like my work in schools and my work with the Talisman project and the art that I make, it's all part of a web. It's all part of the same conversation. How can we be more intentional, and how can we employ story to weave us together? In ancient Greek, the word for an ancient Greek storyteller was rhapsodos, rhapsode, like Bohemian Rhapsody. And rhapsodos means the one that weaves together, stitching together. And you could say that's a stitching together of stanzas, stitching together of stories, but I also think it's a stitching together of society by what's told, by what's spoken, by what we collectively believe that the storyteller brings to the table. So I see myself as a rhapsode in many ways, as a rhapsodos. And I just try to stay true to that in whatever way that comes about.
Luca, thank you so much.
Pleasure,
Sorry
brother.
so much for being on the show. I enjoyed talking to you so much.
You
And I
too,
think
man.
there's a lot of threads in there that people can pull on.
Yes.
And I just finished it. Do you have any final comments for, like, I guess for people who are wanting to find that space in their way? Well, they can find you. So what's the best way to find
Yeah,
the
so
work you do?
I have a website, lukalesson.com. It's very simple. I'm running a poetry retreat in Greece next year. It's in a beautiful place called Meteora in the north of Greece. It's a UNESCO site where there's these beautiful monasteries built up into the cliffs, into the mountains, up in the mountains there in Greece. I also have a big dream to perform at the Herodian, which is an ancient Greek theater in Athens at the base of the Acropolis. That's my big dream. And if you go on my website, you can find how to support that. And I have poetry on YouTube and all sorts of different places. I'm dropping a 21-day writing challenge for people. That is more about what you're talking about, this free writing that you did. It's more about a process of me giving prompts every day for 21 days to get people unstuck and get the writing flowing and let them feel what you and I have both felt, this release of pressure and weight off of our shoulders and onto the page. So that'll be around soon. That'll be up. Yeah, but easy to find online. I have books that people can find as well, and a couple of books of poetry. And the Agape show is touring around the place, and I'll continue doing that show around Australia and hopefully overseas in the next few years. But in general, I hope people just get some value from this conversation and
Oh, no doubt.
can
Yeah,
build
I
on
have.
it.
So, yeah. Thank
Pleasure,
you
bro.
so much. And I hope
Thank
that,
you.
look, I'd love to have you back at a later date.
Yeah, love to,
And
man.
everything we discussed, I'll put in the show notes, everything for Luca. And yeah, thanks so much.
Legend. Thank you, brother.
Thank you, brother.
Peace, man.
Amazing.
Thanks, man.